Welcome to Spill the Ink, a podcast by Reputation Inc., where we feature experts in growth and brand visibility for law firms and architecture, engineering, and construction firms. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everyone, it's Michelle Calcote-King here. I'm the host of the show and also the principal and president of Reputation Inc. We are a public relations and content marketing agency for professional services firms. We understand how sophisticated corporate buyers find and select professional services firms. For the past 10 years, we've helped our clients grow through thought leadership-fueled strategies, including media relations, byline article placement, blogging, email marketing, video marketing, social media, litigation PR, and more. To learn more, go to rep-inc, that's inc with a K.com, or email us at info@rep-inc.com. So our guest today is Marc Teer, and he's the founder of Black Spectacles, which is an online education program providing architects with resources on their path to becoming licensed and advancing their careers. Marc is an award-winning architect. He founded Black Spectacles in 2010 to provide support and inspiration to architects through world-class educational materials and career resources at every stage of their careers. Black Spectacles is the first National Council of Architecture Registration Board's approved test prep provider for all 6 divisions of the ARE 5.0 exam. So there's I'm going to read a little bit more before I let you talk about what you guys do. So Black Spectacles, it's a subscription-based software. It's been established as the preeminent figure in sophisticated online learning. They've generated subscriptions from 27 of the top architecture firms in the United States and 49 of the top 100. Not only has Marc founded this very useful tool for architects, but his company has been named in the top 30 of the Great Place to Work's best workplaces in Chicago in 2020. And Marc himself was elevated to the College of Fellows of the American Institute of Architects in 2020. So welcome. That was quite a mouthful.
Thank you, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to talk to you. So tell me kind of how you founded Black Spectacles. How did you learn that there was a need for this? And tell me about that journey.
Yeah. So I was a practicing architect in the Chicago office of Gensler. And outside of work, and, I was working in their architecture practice basically as a project architect. And outside of my work, let's say, obligations at Gensler, over the course of a few years, I was at once the chair of the Young Architects Forum of AI Chicago, and then did some work teaching at the School of Architecture at IIT. And while teaching, I was teaching building information modeling. And at that moment in time, Revit and BIM was becoming a really big thing.
Right.
3D visualization had already been established as a really big thing, and that was kind of snowballing, and there were new tools and so forth. And then parametric design was a new thing. So, first Rhino scripting and then Grasshopper and so forth. So it was sort of this like really big moment in architectural technology. And I was at Gensler, who had great resources. But I still felt lost as an architect who was in the trenches, doing the modeling, doing all the work. And then I saw my students suffering the same thing. And frankly, the folks that, who were a part of the Young Architects Forum, everybody was suffering from the same thing that I was suffering from when I was a student, which is you're supposed to know all these tools and nobody wants to teach you.
Yeah.
And I had an experience working or subscribing to lynda.com, which is now LinkedIn Learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, a bunch of things just sort of happened at the right time. And I was like, oh my God, we need to do lynda.com for architects, because there really wasn't anything for architects. And I didn't really know it at the time, but it turns out I'm wired to be an entrepreneur. I would imagine a lot of architects are probably wired to be an entrepreneur anyways. And certainly I was. And so I sort of had my, entrepreneurial seizure, as they say, in September of 2010, and sort of like became a man possessed, that I was going to go build and launch this thing. In fact, I even like pounded my fist on the table in September, and I'm like, I'm going to launch this business in like a month, which now, of course, I roll my eyes
Right.
how silly that sounded. But it took us about a year and a half, but we launched in January of 2012. And yeah.
Hey, a
and that
year and
was
a
kind of
half's
the
not
original.
bad.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Yeah, I can relate. So okay, so you launched the community, and tell me sort of how it's changed over the years. Has it evolved, and kind of talk me through that?
Yeah. So we started with software learning, as I mentioned, Grasshopper, Revit, and sort of all the tools that an architect needs to know in order to do their
Yeah.
work. Um, and along the way, it's funny. I'm sure many architects can relate. When you're frustrated at work and you're sort of trying to find your path, an architect goes to their notebook, right? And so I have my moments, or that time, when I went to the gardens of the Art Institute of Chicago and sat there on my lunch hour, sketching the vision for how I was gonna, like, what my next move was. And when I sort of thought about this Black Spectacles thing and this problem around software learning, I was like, well, if we do this software learning thing, we'll probably, there'll be other things we could probably do. Like we could do maybe something even bigger than software learning. And so, so it wasn't very long after we launched, Black Spectacles around software learning that I started having conversations about test prep and helping architects pass the ARE, because we'd already basically built, kind of an online learning environment. And, we thought it would be a reasonable thing to sort of try next. And because of my relationship with the folks at AI Chicago, we just happened to be talking about some other stuff. And this came up, and it turns out they had been running these workshops in person in the office, or in their in their offices there in downtown Chicago. And they had always wanted it. They had gotten feedback from folks who were like, hey, that's really awesome you're doing it, but I'm not working downtown. So it's a real pain to get downtown by 6:00 during the week. So could you make these get these online? And they didn't really have a good platform to do it. And we just sort of like talked about it at the right time. And so that was sort of the beginning of us trying to develop an online test prep, video curriculum. They had been working with Mike Newman, who's an architect here in Chicago, who has a tremendous amount of experience as an educator and as an architect. And he had been, doing workshops for them for many years. And so, the three parties, Black Spectacles, AI Chicago, and Mike Newman, kind of came together to develop that first series of lectures, which, took us, everything takes, 10 times longer than you hope. Ended up taking us almost 2 years from the first conversation to launch. But eventually we launched it, and then it was so successful so fast that relationship made a lot of sense, that we would essentially sort of like work with AI National in order to kind of create a lot of awareness and really try to help the largest number of architects get licensed, because everybody was sort of lined up. Black Spectacles, AI Chicago, National, everybody wanted to help get folks licensed. So it made a lot of sense to do that. About a year into it, we partnered with National, and then the thing really started to take off. Building. We eventually took those videos. We had to remake them because they remade the test about a year or two after we launched them. And then we tried other stuff, practice exams and flashcards and coaching and all sorts of things like that. And it's been, I got to say, it's been incredibly rewarding. We get notes from folks who pass all their exams. We get notes from people who, have a really hard time as they're going through the whole process. There's an incredible amount of hurdles that folks have to conquer, and in order to become a licensed architect. And so it's been incredibly rewarding to have such an impact, in the architecture community around licensure.
That's fantastic. You made a comment, because we work a lot with architects, and I'd love to hear why you say a lot of architects are wired for entrepreneurship. Tell me why you think that.
Yeah, I've thought about it a ton, and If you think about it, the act of architecture is almost by definition an entrepreneurial endeavor, because essentially a client comes to you and says, hey, here's this blank site, with some trees and some grass and whatever on it. I want you to go build me this building that's so many square feet, has this much, has all these things and costs this amount of money. And the architect sort of turns around and says, okay, when do you want it? Like that is an entrepreneurial, sort of endeavor. And, I've often thought that the sort of the confidence and the audacity that an architect brings to that whole endeavor is extraordinary. And it's very similar now that I've sort of been on both sides of it. It's very similar. We're in the middle of doing this with a new endeavor, Spectacular. We'll talk maybe more about it later, but same thing, start with an idea, literally a blank piece of paper, and you start sketching, you start dreaming, and you iterate your way to the solution that makes the most sense. So I think most architects probably fall into, or at least a lot of them do. God knows the training that we get in school absolutely prepares us. So many of the things that we learned as architects in school are like the basics of product development, which I think are relevant
absolutely
to folks who are starting a business of some sort.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Very problem solving, kind of creating something from nothing. That whole process, being creative. Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And it's interesting too. I think we all feel in some way that our own fields are just constantly being interrupted and disrupted by technology, but everyone's field, because as a marketer, I feel like that, like how in the world do we keep up? This technology just keeps changing and changing, but it's like that for virtually everyone. So, fantastic that you jumped on that. So tell me, how is licensure changing? Has that process changed over the years that you've been involved?
Yeah. So, I think the pandemic sort of accelerated a little bit of the, it accelerated the adoption of an online version of the ARE. For folks who might be listening, when I took the exam, it was version, I think 3.1 in 2005. It was a computer-based test, which was kind of the grand innovation at the time. But you had to go to the testing center, like in person. Folks, there's proctors and folks sort of watching to make sure no one's cheating, et cetera. But this year, in fact, had a conversation at some point with the folks at NCARB just to like find out, when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, there's an open question. Well, first of all, they closed all the testing centers. So, for a good 2.5 months, you literally couldn't take a test. You couldn't take any division of the ARE. And then of course they started, slowly opening. I think that at first they were able to get the ARE approved as an essential test so that it qualified to be a part of the exams that could be taken. And even those were taken at 50% capacity. So my understanding was that sort of prompted NCARB to accelerate something that, an idea that was already in the works, but to accelerate this idea of bringing the test online. Because there's many of other standardized tests that are available online. And so I think they originally set a goal of Q1 of 2021, which they beat initially. I think it officially launched in mid-December. And so that's been the key innovation that has happened in the last, 12 months, around the ARE.
Yeah. Well, so since you mentioned the pandemic, I'd love to ask, because I did read that your company is fully remote. So I'd like to just touch on that. We have a remote company as well. I've been that way since 2018. So have you always been remote? Is that, and tell me how that works for Black Spectacles.
Yeah. So no, we were not always remote. In fact, so I started Black Spectacles in 2010. And for the entirety of the business until the pandemic, I was actually pretty strongly on the side of, we need to be in person. We were, I literally started the business in my basement by myself. So we hired one person at a time and slowly built our company. And, I felt really strongly that in order to build a culture, sort of the way we are as a company or as a group of people, we needed to be in person. And so I felt really strongly about that. And I think it was really successful. We did create a really strong culture. And frankly, I don't know if I would have gone fully remote if we hadn't had that sort of good 10-year run in front of us where we were able to establish a culture and sort of a way of doing things. And so when the pandemic hit and everybody went home, like it was like nothing happened. Like we all just went on our merry way and everybody just grabbed their laptops and picked up their mouse and their keyboard and their monitor and went home. And a lot of the systems and processes and again, like rituals that we had, things that, the meetings that we have every week and the huddles we have every day, like a lot of those things, they were designed to create that kind of connection. And that was key to our culture anyways. So we were lucky in the regard or in the idea that, many companies had long leases that were really kind of like pulling them back to the office. And we, again, the timing of things was really sort of interesting. As I launched the business in 2012 here in Chicago, there was a really successful, or there is, I should say, but at that time, a co-working space or / incubator called 1871 started like literally 8 months after I launched Black Spectacles. And I knew actually some of the folks who I worked with at Gensler had worked on the design. And so they sort of tipped me off about it. So I applied, got in, and basically we were in this co-working space from 2012 until 2020. And thankfully we had a really short out of like 2 months. And so we sort of saw what was going on. We were like, well, let's bail on this lease and then we can sort of decide what we're going to do next. That was maybe like May of 2020. By August, our biggest roadblock to growing our business has been finding great people. Not finding anyone, but finding people who are great. And so, we had a discussion with our team at the time. I think we might have been about 20 people. We had a brainstorming session as a company on Zoom and said, all right, what are the pros and cons? Just a good old fashioned, pro and con list. And we did that in a brainstorming activity. And like it was like all pros. And the only con was, man, this is going to kind of suck because now we're not going to be as connected as we used to be. And so, we, through some folks who I knew and other folks on our team knew, we kind of like, collected some ideas for how to try to, create that, that connection, those relationships that you have with the people you work with. And in August of 2012, we decided that or 2020, I should say, we decided we'd become permanently remote. And then we started recruiting nationally. And now I think we're actually pretty close to even. Half the folks on our team, we're about 30 people. So about half the folks on our team are Chicago based and half are remote. And I'm pretty sure the remote folks are going to win out here shortly.
Yeah, it's a fantastic thing to be able to recruit from anywhere. It's also fantastic. So I went remote in 2018. I'd had an office space since 2011. And I had a key team member, come to me and tell me she was moving. And this was right when I was transitioning to remote. And I just said, okay, and we just kind of kept going. There's just this flexibility that it builds in. I mean, it's not for everybody, but it can really work for the right company. So
yeah, we had a couple of the same thing. And it was crazy. Excuse me, the timing. Honestly, about 2 months, maybe 1 month after we announced it, we had one person from our company who said, yeah, we just bought a house in some other state. So good thing that you just went remote. Otherwise this wasn't going to work. And then we had another guy who went and got married and moved to one of the other coasts and was like, good thing you guys became permanently remote because I didn't have to go look for another job. So it actually really helped us, helped everything kind of continue.
Yeah. Thing I want to ask you, well, a couple things, but let's talk about diversity and inclusion and how are you impacting it? It's a big topic in a lot of industries. I know, especially so in architecture. Tell me how you are impacting that issue.
Yeah. So 2 things, I guess, would be the things to talk about at this point. First, just internally, right? We have an initiative going on right now. It took us a little while to kind of get it stood up and sort of do it the right way, we needed some folks who had good experience in doing this. But we're going through the process of surveying our team, and we have some training actually coming up in a couple of weeks to really kind of like bring everyone to kind of like a baseline level, kind of a minimum, at least a minimum standard of sort of understanding of the issues and what we can do within our organization across the board. So first thing was sort of there, I mean, that's what we're doing right now. The other thing is we developed a partnership with NOMA, the National Organization of Minority Architects. They met last year with the AIA Large Firm Roundtable, and they basically developed this idea, or this framework, this challenge they call it 2030 Diversity Challenge, which was essentially a call to grow, essentially to double the number of licensed African-American architects from 2,300 to 5,000 by the year 2030. Wow. So aligned with that, we basically worked with them, the folks at NOMA, to develop a license to give them like significantly discounted access to our test prep materials, so that I think 50 of their members at a time can have access to our learning materials in order to again try to help them achieve that goal of essentially doubling the number of African American architects. So that's something we've been really proud of, and I know the folks at NOMA have been really proud of, and it has been quite successful so far. I don't have any statistics yet to report on. That's basically in the works right now, but it's been a really rewarding thing, because I think, especially last year, I think a lot of folks sort of kind of looked kind of inside and said, what can I do, or what can we do to help, increase diversity and sort of remove barriers. And for us in the architecture world, you look at what we were doing, and what are we doing? We're helping folks architects get licensed. And so it was such a natural partnership.
Yeah.
So really excited that we've been able to do that work together, which is ongoing. My
Absolutely.
hope is that maybe we can not double, but triple that number. See.
Yeah. It's a perfect fit, but kudos to you for moving it forward. And you mentioned very briefly your product Spectacular. Tell me about that, because I want to talk a little bit, since I am a marketing agency, a little bit about marketing and social media and this kind of thing. So tell me about Spectacular.
Yeah, so it's sort of interesting. The origin is interesting. So I told you guys about, sort of the origin of Black Spectacles. And I think with any business that starts from nothing, you kind of have your idea and you kind of put it out there and sort of see where it goes, which we did. We tried that with software learning. And as I said, a natural extension was test prep. We tried that. That was really successful. And we sort of kept following that, right? I think in any young business, once you have something that kind of has some traction, you listen. If you're doing your job, you listen really closely to what your customers are telling you, and you iterate and you add stuff and so on and so forth. So we did that. We launched our test prep in 2014. So we did that, for a good number of years. And then if you're lucky enough to sort of, have caught on to the right thing, you get to a place where you're like, wow, I really have a business now. I have a team. What the heck are we doing? Like, where are we going? Like, are we happy with where we're going? Do we have a clear focus and direction, so forth? So for us, 2018 was that year. That was when we worked and developed our core values as a company, which we'd never had before. And we also developed a core purpose. What was interesting about that was it essentially was like a strategy in a purpose, if that makes sense. So the idea was, we had a choice. We could have had a successful test prep offering. We could have, maybe gotten into other disciplines, like maybe engineering or construction or landscape architecture or something. We'll sort of go wide with our test prep. Or we could stay really focused in the architecture space and sort of think about other things that we could, let's say, assist with. And that was that latter approach is the route we went. We said, we want to stay focused in architecture. So then do we want to just be test prep? Do we want to just be education? Like, how big of a vision do we want to have? And we ultimately decided that really helping an architect throughout their whole career was really the idea, the thing that got us really excited, to get up for work every day. And what was really cool about that process of sort of dreaming about where we wanted to go and what our purpose is as soon as we defined it, 3 or 4 ideas fell right out of it. And one of those ideas was this idea that, number one, I think at the time, again, it's 2018, there were other creative disciplines like the web design world or graphic design world that have these sort of online portfolios, right? But everybody who I knew is still printing out or, has like a print, portfolio, is emailing PDFs like it's 1985. So it seemed logical to me that, an architect's portfolio should have a place online.
Yeah.
And then, through the work that we've been doing with all these firms, it became clear. And frankly, it was sort of funny, like my struggles in growing my company, as I mentioned earlier, around finding the right people. Oh my God, I spent so much time trying, interviewing, coming up with the proper interview process, learning about all these things. And while I'm doing that, I'm like, oh my God, this doesn't exist in architecture. Like, there's no one place you go to find great talent.
Yeah.
And if you're looking for someone who has worked on high rises and who is, who's truly an expert in, let's say, CAD and can do 3D renderings and, has, built an elevator core or has designed and built an elevator core, and like, that's insane. You can't find that anywhere, So the thought was, boy, is there some way that we could develop essentially one place where architects and firms could come together and we could sort of connect them around their portfolio in an effort to, number one, elevate an architect's profile. But number two, on the other side of it, help firms find really talented people. And now, and again, the timing, certainly 2020 provoked us. This idea of Spectacular was something that we had been thinking about for a while. It was actually a part of our 2020 annual goals. But as soon as the pandemic hit, honestly, like 2 weeks later, we decided, all right, we're going to start working on this right now. Because I knew from talking to so many friends, architects were getting crushed. If you were not in the middle of a project that was still being funded, you got furloughed or you got laid off within like 2 months. As with everything else, it took 10 times longer than I had hoped to get it live. But we launched Spectacular in September of this year, 2021, and so far, and we launched it in a gated environment initially, so that we could sort of get some early feedback, iterate on it, ensure its stability, and so forth.
Yeah.
And so far, it's gone really well. It's been really exciting. What's been crazy is it's been really exciting to launch a second endeavor, and like doing a lot of the same things that I did to start Black Spectacles.
Right.
12 years later, again, has been really interesting. So
yeah, what fun! I'd love to hear where the name Black Spectacles came from.
Yeah. So I mean, in short, it came from a naming exercise, but it became compelling because we realized, if you had a room of 100 architects and you looked at that room, half of them would be wearing really cool designer black glasses. It was just this culture thing about black, really cool black glasses. So that was the origin of the name.
It's a great name. So as a company that does branding, I love the name. It's very, very cool.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. That was really cool. I'm excited to kind of share with our audience this your company and your story. So, Marc, if people want to learn more about your company and you, get in touch with you, where should they go?
Yeah. So, of course, Black Spectacles is at blackspectacles.com, and Spectacular is at spectacular.design. And cool. You can request access to Spectacular right on the gated landing page. And we expect it to be available sometime in 2022 for everybody.
Great. Yeah, I'm gonna follow that because I'd love to take a look at it. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks for listening to Spill the Ink, a podcast by Reputation Inc. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.